I remember him, coming and finding me in the office one day, going, Cindy, Cindy. And he was white-faced, okay? And I went, Neil, what is it? What is it? He went, Cindy, John Hegarty is mopping the floor in the gents' toilets.
Hello, welcome to the Lions podcast with me, Simon Cook, the CEO of Lions. In this In the Making series, we delve into the visionary and most Lion awarded minds in the creative marketing industry and explore their past, their present, and their creative futures. To bring their stories to life, we asked them to talk about 5 pieces of work. The work that made them want to be a creative in the first place. The work they wish they'd made themselves. The work that almost didn't get made. And the work that made them. And then finally, the work that's still very much in the making. In other words, the work they've yet to make. Our guest today needs no introduction, a consultant, entrepreneur, and a fierce advocate for change. She brings 38 years of experience in brand building and advertising, including a position as the chair of BBH New York. Fast forward to today, and she's blowing shit up, working across ventures including social sex tech platform Make Love Not Porn. That's right, we are delighted to be joined by someone who's not just reinventing the industry, she's creating her own. Welcome to In the Making, the formidable, the brilliant Cindy Gallop. Cindy Gallop, welcome to In the Making.
Thank you, Simon. Thrilled to be here.
So I thought we'd start by going back in time a little bit. Let's think about where this all began. Going back to your childhood, Cindy, you once described your upbringing as the antithesis of perhaps where you've ended up and what you're doing today. Tell us about how it all began and how it all started.
Sure. So I am half English, half Malaysian Chinese. My father was English. He passed away a few years ago. My mother is Malaysian Chinese. And I was born in the UK, but when I was 6, my father got a job in Brunei, in Borneo. And so we all moved to Brunei, which is where I and my sisters grew up. And I always have to say that growing up in Brunei is a lot more boring than it sounds. It's a very small, 100-mile long, very orthodox Muslim state. And, being half Chinese, I grew up very much in Asian culture, especially given what I do now. My parents never ever talked about sex. That was absolutely not spoken about at all. And one was very much expected to conform to societal expectations.
And what expectations did they have from you from the outset? And tell us about how you may have rebelled along the way or decided to do different things.
Honestly, do you know, I didn't really rebel along the way, in the sense that, I was absolutely brought up with the expectation that at some point I would get married and have children. And also, those were the days for my generation when it was very much about, you study hard, you go to a good university, you get a good degree, get a good job. And, my mother was tiger mother par excellence. So my childhood was characterized by extreme academic pressure from both my parents, actually, come top of the class or don't come home, which honestly, was not fun when I was going through it. But that was what, did have a lot to do with the shaping of my life. And I remember the summer before I sat Oxbridge, I went into a Hallmark card shop here in London, and I saw a Peanuts card that I instantly bought and sent to my parents. It was a cartoon of Snoopy lying on his kennel with a big thought bubble that said, "There's no heavier burden than a great potential." And that was exactly how I felt at the time. No idea what my parents thought when I got it. But nevertheless, I won a scholarship to Oxford. And the day I arrived at Somerville, honestly, I was so grateful to my parents for pushing me.
So hugely academic upbringing, studying English literature.
Yep.
When did creativity first show up in a meaningful way for you?
So I guess Oxford was where I fell in love with theatre. It has a thriving student drama scene, and I had never had the chance to steep myself in any of that before. And so I became the president of Somerville Drama Society, and I did everything. I wrote, acted, directed, stage managed. I decided all I wanted to do was work in theatre for the rest of my life, as you do when you're 20, And I knew I wasn't good enough to be an actress or director, but at Oxford, my friends pulled me into designing theatre posters for their shows. And from there, they sucked me into promoting their shows. And I really enjoyed doing that. Then I went to the other extreme and I moved to Liverpool, where I became the marketing officer for the Everyman Theatre there. At the time, part of my job at the Everyman was giving talks about the theatre to promote it. So I gave a talk to a group of women on Merseyside. And afterwards, one of them came up to me and she went, "Young lady, you could sell a fridge to an Eskimo." And I went, "That is the universe telling me something. Time to sell out, go into advertising." So I did.
And how did you make the transition? So what year was it? Which agency? What was your first impression of our industry?
So the answer is I made the transition with great difficulty because this is going to sound really weird to our audience, sadly, but we are talking 1985 and advertising was the hottest industry that every single university graduate wanted to get into. And so I tried applying speculatively to a number of agencies and, ran into that chicken and egg problem where, they wouldn't hire me because I had no experience. I couldn't get experience unless they hired me. And so I basically took a step back, as it were, and I went back onto the, graduate milk round, as we called it, several years late, i.e. I applied for entry-level graduate trainee schemes. And what that meant was, you spent 6 months working in every department in the agency. You absolutely, saw and experienced and worked on every single aspect of our business from soup to nuts, which was actually a phenomenal training ground in really understanding how everything worked, as well as being put on accounts from day one and also working on business from day one as well. And that was just a phenomenal grounding in the industry.
Well, I'd like to get into the account side to get your perspective on that. But before we do, we're going to dive into your first piece of work. This is the piece of work that inspired you to create or be a part of this industry in the first place. You've chosen a popular piece, we've had it before on the podcast, Laundrette for Levi's. But you've got a really interesting take on this one. You've often said that you don't believe that sex sells in the generic sense. What was it about this piece that you found so interesting?
I found Laundrette extremely powerful for several reasons. The first is that it was the ad that made me realise that I'm a complete and total sucker for advertising myself. I'm enormously susceptible to great advertising. And by the way, I always say I wouldn't be good at my job if I wasn't. But basically, at the time, I just didn't wear jeans. I'd never worn jeans. I didn't think I looked good in them. I took one look at Laundrette and I went straight out, literally the next day, and I bought myself a pair of 501s, which, by the way, I still did not look good in. but I had to buy them because Laundrette came, and it really was, I'm not going to, bore our audience by talking about what everyone always talks about. I mean, it was a phenomenal combination of, that sense of a moment in time. It was a period piece, obviously. The surprise of, what took place. Obviously, Nick Kim was sexy as hell. But just, the brilliant casting of all the other occupants of the Laundrette. Clearly, the music, John Hegarty always said, 85% of the power of each Levi's ad was the soundtrack. So first of all, that ad absolutely did what it was meant to do. It made me go out and buy a pair of 501s. Well-known fact, it had so many other ripple effects. Sales of boxer shorts rocketed in the UK post that ad. Historically, boxer shorts had not been a big UK men's thing. And the moment Nick came and took, his Levi's off and was wearing boxer shorts, whoosh, and then, as I found out years later, around the same time, Levi's were advertising for a receptionist at their offices. And they got 2,000 applications for the job of receptionist, again, because that ad had the halo effect of making people go, oh, my God, I want to work for this company. But equally, that was the ad that made me want to work at BBH. And it took a while, but I got there.
And it took you a little while, not long actually, to actually work at BBH yourself. So was it 1989?
It was 1989, but
How did you secure that job?
I only got to work at BBH on my third attempt.
Ooh, okay.
And what I mean by that is I began interviewing around town, and one of the agencies I interviewed at was BBH. I went, oh my God, it's the hottest agency in town, 1987 this was. And everything seemed to be going very, very well. I met Tim Lindsay, I met Jerry Judge, and this is to work as an account manager. And then, they said, okay, just a formality, but Nigel Bogle likes to interview all our account people, before they join. So, we'd have to come in and meet Nigel Bogle. And it was one of those interviews that just went wrong from the moment I set my foot over the threshold. Nigel and I just did not get on that interview, and I did not get the job. Okay. And then in 1989, a headhunter called me and said, there's this job as an account director at BBH. And I went, oh, no, they don't like me. They're not interested. And the headhunter went, look, give it a whirl. I really think that you'd be perfect. So I went into BBH, met all the same people again, hello.
I'm back.
Got on very well with all of them. And then, the headhunter said, look, it's looking really good. There's just one final interview. You have to come in and meet Nigel Bogle. I went, oh my God, it's all over. It's all over. So I schlepped over to Great Pulteney Street, in fear and trembling, going, okay, I've got to put myself through this humiliating exercise to get rejected again. And this time, the interview was completely different because Nigel came into the room and he was holding a piece of paper. And he said, I hope you're impressed with our filing system. So I thought he was holding my application from 2 years ago. But he was actually holding something I'd completely forgotten about, which was my speculative letter from the Everyman Theatre Liverpool back in 1985,
wow,
applying to like half a dozen agencies on spec. And the moment he showed it to me, I remembered that of all of them, BBH was the only one where one of the partners had written back personally, Nigel, and had been really nice in that letter in terms of saying, listen, we're a startup, because they'd only just launched in 1982. We can't hire anybody who hasn't already worked in advertising, but I wish you all the best. And the meeting went completely differently to the last time around. Nigel said, everybody here wants you to join us, and I'm being blamed as the only person who stopped you joining us last time around. We're going to offer you a job. I hope you take it. And so they offered me a job. I took it. I remember, Nigel introducing me in a pitch meeting sometime later and said something about, when I interviewed Cindy. Then he went, I spent a lot of time interviewing Cindy. So I made it into BBH on the third try.
Third time's a charm. There we go. Cindy, it's time to move into your second piece of work. This is the piece of work that you wish you made yourself. It's for the US Navy. Can you set it up for us? Tell us a bit about it.
Sure. So basically, whenever I'm asked what is my favourite ad of all time, this is the ad that I always cite. And it's my favourite ad of all time for a couple of reasons. The first is that I'm a huge fan of radical simplicity. I like to keep things very simple. I think the best work in our industry works very, very simply. And this ad absolutely demonstrates that. And then secondly, I'm all about communication through demonstration. Don't say it, be it, do it, show it. The ad is, very short, as I said, very simple. It is a fixed camera in one position looking at a beach and the ocean at night. Waves go out. There are a series of footprints in the sand. And then the waves come in again and go out, and the sand is as if nobody had ever crossed it. It is brilliant in its simplicity, in its demonstration of what we all know the Navy SEALs do and have to do, and in making being a Navy SEAL look enormously desirable and sexy. So that is absolutely the ad that I wish I'd done.
And for all of the pieces that you've curated for us today, they are all TV and cinema commercials. What is it about this medium that you like so much and is so effective in your opinion?
I talked for many years about the opportunity with the cutting edge of technology and the internet. Obviously, as I was progressing in my advertising career, particularly, moving to New York to start up BBH New York in 1998, when, the internet and digital was coming into its own. And, I talked for many years about the fact that the future is video. The future is the moving image. And then this is before, by the way, that exploded on social media. This is obviously years before TikTok. And, it is such a visceral medium. It is so good at eliciting emotional responses. It still continues to be, in my view, the most powerful medium in which our industry can create. And so, I think, that's why I've homed in on film as, the best demonstration of what our industry can do at its very best.
Your unique position as someone on the account side, when you've been working with some of the most challenging clients throughout your career, what tips would you give to someone thinking about starting out on that side of the industry?
I would really want people to understand how incredibly important account management is as a discipline. And that is also something the industry has lost sight of. Because, I was absolutely brought up, and obviously, London, late 80s, we're talking old school training and understanding of the role of account management. But it was absolutely our job as account people to create the relationship of trust with the client and the climate of receptivity that would then enable the agency to sell in great work. That was our responsibility. And, the best account people absolutely deliver on that. Great work will not get made without brilliant account people, building a relationship with the client where, again, I come from the old school of you need to know the client's business better than they do. You need, I've done the factory visits, all of that. You need to understand the inner workings of the industry better than the clients themselves to be able to help deliver work that will be truly effective for them.
Which brings us very neatly to your third piece of work, which you've called upon as the piece that nearly didn't get made. And so we can get into why that was. But you've chosen a piece that you pitched at BBH, the Polaroid Rockstar TV commercial. Now, before we get into it, we're going to hear from someone else. So we've been talking to a few of your ex-colleagues. To set it up, we've got Karen Hand.
Love her.
Who is your partner on this piece of work. She's now the founder of Strategy and Research. And she provided some background on how this all came about.
Excellent.
I first met Cindy in 1994 when I joined BBH as a strategic planner. We were paired together for the Polaroid Europe pitch, and I got a chance to see Cindy's black belt strategic skills up close and personal. She completely devoured the client's Nielsen data with her photographic memory and proceeded to commission qualitative research in 5 countries to find out what made Polaroid special. All got a bit stressful when the research came back with nothing, but undaunted, Cindy commissioned the agency to do a number of social experiments, and from that discovered that the true value of Polaroid did not lie in the film, but in the experience it gave people as a social lubricant.
I have to say, Karen is not giving herself full credit as my strategic partner and as the planner on Polaroid, because that was absolutely a team effort.
So as she said there, repositioning something as a social lubricant, something like Polaroid. The client didn't like hearing that? What challenges did you have to overcome to sell that in? Because you mentioned it nearly didn't get made. So
Polaroid... the Polaroid clients were one of my favorite clients of all time. So Polaroid was one of my favorite clients, and the client team were some of my favorite clients of all time. Because, first of all, bear in mind that this is back in the day when BBH never, ever pitched with creative. We pitched with strategy, And so, we were saying to them, you think Polaroid is a camera and instant film, and we're telling you it's not. it's a social lubricant. It's something that makes parties go with a swing because, again, this is obviously years before digital, and the joy of that instant photo. When you had a Polaroid camera, you took those photos, everyone gathered around, you had those rituals, you stuck it in your armpit. By the way, did not need to do any of that. You didn't need to wave it in the air, or it was still developed fine, but everyone did that.
Yeah.
And then the picture gradually, showed itself. And you were looking at yourselves capturing the moment in a way that obviously today we do unthinkingly on our phones. But back then in 1994, that was a truly extraordinary experience. The core client team that we were pitching to absolutely loved this strategy, bought it, awarded us the business. But the challenge with Polaroid Europe was that it was Polaroid Europe. Nobody wants to have work imposed on them from the centre, and everyone has lots of reasons why in their market things are different, and that's why this won't work. And, I only discovered this sometime later through my key day-to-day client at Polaroid, Tim Palmer, who was absolutely wonderful, loved working with him. But basically, the head of Polaroid Europe at the time, he basically wrote an email to every market across Europe. And Tim showed me this, much, much later. And he said, Listen, this is why we hired BBH. They are brilliant. Their strategy is excellent. They really understand that the sales picture, what we need to do to really increase our numbers, etc. They've come up with what they recommend as the most effective strategy. And what I'm saying to you is give them 6 months. Stand back, hands off, give them 6 months to make this work, run it, see the sales results. Because we trust them and we want you to trust us and trust them too. And honestly, to see a client write something like that to all of their individual markets across Europe, I think that's pretty bloody rare. It was rare in my experience back then. I think it'd be even rarer now,
today.
And that's how we were able to shoot the campaign we did. Rockstar was just the first commercial in the whole series. That basically demonstrated that Polaroid brings people together, connects people in surprising ways. The tagline was live for the moment. It was all about instant and what the power of instant film could do, the power of instant Polaroids. And it was very effective. But to this day, that remains for me like one of the most wonderful things a client can possibly do for its agency, to have that amount of trust and to make sure the rest of the company, stands back and allows the agency to do its best work.
And such a message of advocacy to other markets as well. So I was going to ask you how it all panned out, but back to Karen, because she's going to fill in the gaps for us. Here we go.
Cindy'd worked in theatre before she came into advertising. This was evident in the way that she designed, rehearsed, and delivered pitches. I can still hear her crystal clear diction when she delivered the killer blow to the client in the pitch of Polaroid is not a camera. And to make sure that they got the point, she mocked up a vodka bottle with a Polaroid logo on it. The pitches were pretty full on. And one of Cindy's favourite mottos was no pizzas on my pitches. So we enjoyed the benefits of fine dining throughout the whole experience. And when we finally won, Cindy fought for and secured pay rises and bonuses for everyone who'd worked on the team.
Wow.
Oh, Karen.
What a lovely message. No pizzas on your pitches. And you managed to secure pay rises for everyone who worked on that pitch. Incredible stuff.
Well, again, I think Karen's given me too much credit, Simon. It was, a team effort, basically.
So fast forward a bit then, now to 1998. Why was that year significant?
So 1998 was the year that I got to live my dream. Basically because when I was at BBH London as a young, thrustingly ambitious account director, as you do, I pinned Nigel Bogle up against the wall. I went, where am I going in this agency? And Nigel did the very good management tactic of turning the question back on me. He said, Cindy, you tell us what you want to do and we'll make it happen. And he said, don't be bounded by the realms of the possible. If you want a job that doesn't exist yet, tell us what it is. So I thought, can't say fairer than that. I will release him from the, chokehold I got him in. I went off, I thought about it. I came back and I said, okay, my dream job would be running BBH North America. And I'd be willing to do it in San Francisco. And I said that because of Levi's being obviously a very important client. And I said, but to be my true dream job, I'd be doing it in New York. And this is when we only had one office in London. And so Nigel said, well, interestingly, we've just begun talking about America. So your request is logged. Now, in fact, we ended up opening BBH Asia Pacific first because we had more clients in Asia asking for a presence there. So I went out there as the deputy to Simon Sherwood, and basically had the experience of setting up a BBH office in another region, which was very useful for then finally in 1998 getting my dream job, which was to go and start up BBH New York.
And what was the big ambition? What did you want to achieve within the first 2 to 3 years?
So, BBH New York began as me in a room with a phone, literally, starting an ad agency in the world's toughest advertising marketplace, Madison Avenue. And, as we accumulated a very small group of people in one room in the Tribeca Film Center, which was our first office, I said to my team, our vision is that we are going to be the best agency in America. And I said to them, now, if the folks, down the road at, Ogilvy, McCann Erickson, JWT, Y&R could hear us, they'd be rolling around on the floor in hysterics. But the reason it's really important we set that vision now is because when we decide we're going to be the best agency in America, that enables us to measure everything we do by, does this take us one step closer to being the best agency in America? And that was absolutely about bringing BBH's culture of excellence to the US. John Hegley came over as our ECD because the partners felt America was important enough that one of them needed to be here. Emma Cookson came over as our chief strategy officer, but everyone else was, hired from within the market. And it was just very important we thought about ourselves as an American agency in order to win American clients and be able to deliver effectiveness in the American market.
And 4 years later, the agency was absolutely flourishing. I've got some stats here. Levi's handed over its US account to BBH without a pitch. Billings had risen by 134%. And you had been named Adweek's Agency of the Year.
Eastern Agency of the Year.
Oh, Eastern Agency of the Year.
But it was the quickest that any agency had gotten to that title from literally starting up.
Yeah, and here's the proof of it. Tell us about this picture, Cindy.
Oh, my God. Okay. Can I just say that picture was the photographer's idea? Honestly,
it's fantastic.
Well, it's hysterical. I mean that is the album cover, basically.
It is.
Yeah. So for the benefit of our listeners, basically, Adweek sent a photographer around to photograph the team, which at the time was myself, Emma Cookson as our chief strategy officer, Ty Montague, our original creative director, had moved on, and Kevin McEwen was our second ECD, and Dan Tucker, who was our CFO. And basically, the photographer got us to do one of those poses where, we all struck power poses.
It's a power pose.
Yeah, it's a power pose. Yeah. And by the way, I don't know, but I can just imagine the comments back in London when this did the rounds.
Look it up, people. You got to see this coat. It's wonderful. But as you mentioned there, it hadn't always been smooth sailing over those 4 years. Your one creative director left quite abruptly in 2000. Reebok, sadly, decided to move their business in 2001. How did you manage the downs as well as the ups?
Honestly, we just hired the most amazing people, and to this day, we have reunions of, the original BBH New York employees, and so many of them have gone on to do wonderful things. We were a really tight team. We had a very clear vision, a very clear mission. And, honestly, we just got down in the trenches and made it happen, basically. And I do have to tell you, when I say down in the trenches, so, I want to pay enormous tribute to John Hegarty, who, worked in those trenches with us for the first couple of years at BBH New York. And we moved out of the Tribeca Film Centre. We eventually outgrew, our little set of rooms, and we found offices on West 22nd Street in Chelsea. We found a kind of old loft space, and it was pretty old. And in the men's toilets, one of the stalls would regularly flood, and so we kept a mop in the corner. And the deal was, anybody in there, when it flooded, you got that mop out and you mopped it up yourself. Anyway, Neil Christie, who at the time was an account director at BBH London, also went on to do great things. But I remember him, coming and finding me in the office one day, going, Cindy, and he was white-faced. Okay, and I went, Neil, what is it? He went, Cindy. John Hegarty is mopping the floor in the gents' toilets. And I went, oh yeah, he does it all the time. By the way, he makes us coffee as well. It's great. But I mean, that was John. He absolutely got in there, with the rest of us, mopped up the floor in the gents' loos. He was just the most wonderful partner to have when you are in startup in the trenches mode.
And when you ultimately decided to move on, I'm sure a lot of people at the time had some wise words for you as you were stepping out the door, as did, according to this clip, Mr. John Hegarty. So let's take a look.
Oh my God.
And anybody who knows Cindy understands she is about energy. And wonderful thing when she went out on her own, I said to Cindy, you've got the perfect name for your new business. It is, of course, Gallop. And it's called Why Walk When You Can Gallop.
Absolutely. John Hegarty wrote me my end line. He wrote me my tagline, my slogan.
He did?
When I left, and I absolutely loved it. I had business cards printed up with it. So lovely.
Really nice. So we're going to move on to your fourth piece of work. This is the work that made you. Lots of different interpretations, as our listeners will have heard from previous guests. This piece, though, you've selected its Axe shopping cart. Tell us about this piece of work. Can you set it up for us?
Sure. So, the really challenging thing about starting up BBH New York was that it didn't matter whether BBH London already had the global or the European account for a client. We had to win that client in America from scratch all over again. So one of the clients we had to pitch for was Lynx/Axe. And that was because Unilever wanted to launch Axe into the US. Hugely important launch for them. And especially important because this wasn't just about launching a new brand, it was about launching a whole new category. Men's deodorant body sprays did not exist in the US at that time. So we stealth pitched for Axe 3 years before this was actually going to launch. Because that was how long it was going to take to tee up everything to launch Axe from the Unilever side, as well as tee up the strategy and all of the work, from the agency side. We won the pitch. And so we launched Axe into the US in August of 2002. And Unilever set us an enormously challenging sales target. We're launching in August of 2002, and they said, by year end, i.e. in 4 months' time, we want to be 3% of the entire US men's deodorant market. We made it 4%. Wow. So this is a very effective launch. And one of the reasons it was effective, and this is why I want to highlight this work, because, as an account person by background, I think it's really important people understand what really goes into business effectiveness for our clients in a way that is not always immediately apparent when you look at the consumer-facing campaigns. So I always remember our Unilever clients saying to us about this launch, you think that our target for Axe in the US is young men, 16 to 24, classic Axe core target market. They said it's not. It's the deodorant bar at Walmart. And they were absolutely right, because if you want to conquer the US market with a new brand and entirely new sector launch, you've got to get on the shelves at Walmart. You need the nation's biggest retailer, welcoming you in, giving you shelf space, really buying into your brand to give you any chance of achieving your sales goals. And so we literally created an entire campaign for Sell into Walmart, which I love because, again, to this day, I think that they are the gold standard of how you get creative in store. So, Walmart has Walmart TV. And the way brands historically used it, and I guess still do, is, they would run their ads on Walmart TV. And what we did was we created a campaign specially for Walmart TV, which was a series of, 15-second ads that were designed to look, when you were in Walmart, like what you were seeing on the TV screen was what a security camera was showing you elsewhere in the store. Obviously, these are part of a very large 360 campaign, but I highlight those out of all of them because they really demonstrate how you have to think through every aspect of the business to do what we do for our clients' brands, which is make them bloody successful. Our Axe campaign was groundbreaking, hugely successful, introduced, as I say, not just the brand, but the product sector. P&G, came out with Old Spice, and male body spray very quickly after that. And that was one of the campaigns that put BBH New York on the map very early on.
You've dedicated a huge part of your time in your career and your energy to more than just the work, more equitable experience for people within our industry as well, and more broadly. So I'm thinking back to 10 years ago when we first met, actually, when I called you and asked you whether you would not only preside over, but help us create and launch the Glass Lions, the Lions for Change.
Yep.
Time flies.
It certainly does.
And at the time, we created the awards with the intention of shattering gender stereotypes within our industry. So putting a spotlight on work that does that. You very kindly agreed to be our first inaugural jury president for that lion. You're reprising the role.
Indeed, yep.
10 years later, so thank you for that. But thinking back 10 years, you had that first jury experience with Glass. You then took to the stage at our award show and gave a very rousing speech. Do you remember what you said?
I certainly do.
Good.
And I'll tell you why I remember, Simon, because I had obviously prepared the short speech that the jury president was about to give. And as I recall, the Glass Lions were being presented halfway through the evening. And I sat in the audience waiting for the moment to get on stage. And I watched, as I sat, man after man after man going up and receiving awards. And I got more and more and more irate at that fact. And so I literally rewrote my speech in my head as that happened. And that is what resulted in the speech that I gave when it was my turn to go on stage.
In an industry where the default setting is always male, where the number of female creatives coming up on this stage tonight to accept awards is tiny compared to the number of men, where in 2015, the fact that we have... When in 2015, the fact that 3 out of 5 jury presidents on this stage are women is notable and applauded, for me, the Glass Lion is a perfect opportunity for self-examination. Take a long, hard look at your agency, at your holding company, at your brand, at your creative department, at our industry, and ask yourself, would I award us a Glass Lion?
And what a reception it had in the room. So, Cindy, coming back 10 years later, I guess the only change this year is that change in format. When you get to Cannes, the way that Glass Lions works is our entrants will be presenting to you and the rest of the jury, like Dragon's Den or Shark Tank.
I love that. I think that's fantastic.
And they will be subjected to 10 minutes of grilling from you and the jury. What kind of questions are going to be important to you, and what will you ask?
So what would be important to me and the jury, because I think, based on our call last week, we're all very like-minded on this. first of all, it is enormously important that this work comes from a place of authenticity and integrity. Part of that authenticity and integrity is also we are going to be extremely interested in who is actually behind the work. Not just what the work is, what it shows, but who actually was called upon to make it. We're going to be absolutely looking at then how effective this work can be in genuinely driving change, because there's a lot of woke washing in our industry. There's a lot of this is a really clever idea versus is this going to shift attitudes, mindsets, behaviors in the way that we need to? And obviously, because this is Cannes Lions, does this work operate the highest standards of creativity and creative excellence in order to do that? I think we also want to look at the ripple effects of, how much this work can really drive, attitude and mindset and behavioral shifts within our industry as a whole.
Fantastic stuff. Well, thank you again for reprising the role. It's time to move on to your fifth and final piece of work. But before we do that, someone set it up very kindly for us. We spoke to your pal, Rob Mayhew, who is an industry social media sensation right now.
Love Rob Mayhew.
Very funny sketches, if you haven't seen them on LinkedIn, about the quirks of our industry.
Absolutely.
For his thoughts. And what he had to say was, Cindy is a lighthouse of inspiration who constantly reminds me and many others every day that it's possible to change the industry for the better. I think Cindy's most important work is still ahead of her.
Oh,
nice to hear from Rob. So that brings us to our final section, the work that is very much in the making. Cindy, tell us what's in the mix.
So, what's in the mix is very exciting, Simon, because I've seen an opportunity to roll up a number of my personal philosophies of advertising to do something that I really hope will help the industry as a whole. And what I mean by that is, first of all, I do all the advocacy and championship work I do for our industry because I bloody love advertising. I bloody love our industry. And I want people to love advertising again. We are operating in a world where, a lot of, quite frankly, nefarious practices in ad tech mean that people consider advertising an obstruction, an interference, an interruption. And, obviously, I grew up in the British advertising industry where, I have to say, in this country, we do have a particular populist appreciation of advertising. I really want people to love and appreciate advertising again. Secondly, I have for years now been exhorting the women of our industry to start ad tech ventures, because ad tech is as white male dominated as advertising and tech. We as women are the primary targets of all advertising as the primary purchasers, influence purchasers of everything. But we are targeted and sold to through the white male lens. And to add insult to injury, the white men are the ones making all the money out of that. And so for years I've said, women of the advertising industry start ad tech businesses because we know how to sell to ourselves. So I saw an opportunity to take my own advice, because my own business, Make Love Not Porn, is infuriatingly banned from advertising and promoting itself across all platforms. And for our audience's benefit, you should know that this is a gendered bias. It's not just a sex tech venture like mine. Any female lens sexual health and wellness venture is also banned for advertising. Menstruation, menopause, fertility ventures can't advertise on Facebook, Instagram, et al. In the meantime, male sexual health and wellness, not a problem. Erectile dysfunction solutions, welcome everywhere. So I have decided that I am going to build my own ad tech product. And in the first instance, I want to pilot this across my own properties, Make Love Not Porn, but with the aim of proving concept in a way that will then enable me to turn this into an ad exchange that plugs in everywhere else. And I want to build this product on the complete opposite of the existing ad tech model, which, as we all know, is focused on reach, eyeballs, clickbait, and a shit ton of fraud. I mean, more and more which is being exposed every day. I want to build ad tech that serves ads that people actively want to watch. There are 3 reasons people will want to watch the ads this ad tech serves. The first is that when I build this, I'm going to open it up to everybody like me who is currently banned from advertising, which, as I've said, is very broad swathe of businesses, including the big players in our industry. We're talking about products that help us all in very intimate areas of lives we're all desperate for help with. But people can't see these ads anymore because they're banned. So at a baseline informational, educational awareness perspective, people are going to want to see these ads. But secondly, on here for the ads, you'll be able to advertise any bloody way you like. No censorship, no holds barred. And I use the term bloody advisedly because Sanpro ads, forget the blue ink on the pad, bring on the blood, have fun with it. We're talking every brand and agency's dream creative brief. Be funny, engaging, entertaining in all of these areas. And by the way, think of the Cannes Lions Award winners that could potentially result. And thirdly, very importantly, at the heart of everything I build coming out of Make Love Not Porn lies human curation. This is ad tech people will apply to be allowed to advertise on, because we will have what I call the human curation layer on top of the internet, on top of our application, where our curators will decide whether A, we endorse your brand, you've got to be legitimate, but B, whether you're advertised of sufficient quality of entertainment engagement to be served on an ad channel that is all about ads that people actively want to watch. When I can show you an ad channel where the brands are legitimate, the sky does not fall, the ads are fantastic, people love them, they're going viral at knots, and they're generating a huge amount of revenue because we have a very interesting business model as part of all of this. That's when, hopefully, I can not only turn it into an ad exchange that plugs in everywhere else, I help break down the barriers for advertising for all of us across the internet as a whole.
And in just a few weeks, you're going to be talking about this and more on the main stage at Cannes.
I'm looking forward to it.
What would you like the reaction to be in an ideal world?
For years, we have colluded in our own devaluation. And we have given away our power. And I say that specifically in the area of ad tech because we are the business model for the internet. We are the reason all of these ad platforms are making their billions of dollars in revenue. And we have the opportunity to take that power back in a way that enables us to showcase our creativity the way we want it to be showcased, in a way that will result not only in more creativity, but also in what I think we all want, which is how we can all make a great deal more money for ourselves versus the platforms we're currently enthralled to.
Well, for those people that come along, they'll hear much, much more. Cindy, we mentioned earlier that you're a big fan of radical simplicity. If you could wave a magic wand, what's the number one simple thing that you'd like to change about our industry? And second part to that, what's the single piece of advice that you would give to people entering our industry for the first time or thinking about it?
So the answer to the first is very simple, Simon. If every single powerful man in our industry hired into equal power with them brilliant women they feel threatened by. It's that simple. Mm-hmm. And the second thing I would say to people coming into our industry today is don't. And let me explain what I mean by that, okay? What I mean by that is don't come into advertising to come into advertising. Instead, come into advertising to make what you want to happen. Come into advertising and take a long, hard look around you at our industry with the freshness of perspective that you have when you're a new entrant, and identify what you think is missing that should be there. What you would love to have available within our industry that isn't because no one's built it. What you think you could uniquely bring to the table that nobody else has, and then start that. Because you will be reinventing and redesigning our industry for the future in a way that it very badly needs.
Very good. Cindy, thank you so much for being here on In the Making. Final question. Time to grab a martini.
Oh my God, abso-bloody-lutely. Yup.
You can catch Cindy's session on Friday the 21st of June at Cannes Lions 2024, live from the Debussy stage, or through our digital pass on The Work. And if you've enjoyed this edition of the podcast, hit subscribe or follow the Lions podcast on your favourite podcasting platform. Big thanks to Cindy once again, and we'll see you next time on In the Making.